The train from Coimbra to Lisboa carried Peter through the heart of Portugal, following the Tagus River as it widened toward the Atlantic. After the emotional intensity of discovering his grandfather's letter and making his decision about the inheritance, Peter had chosen to travel alone to Lisbon, wanting time to process everything that had happened before the crucial council meeting scheduled for the following week. João had understood Peter's need for solitude and had returned to Porto to begin preparations for the formal ceremony where Peter would officially accept his role as leader of the Portuguese operations. But before that ceremony, Peter wanted to explore Lisbon on his own terms, to experience the capital city where so much of Portugal's history and culture converged. As the train pulled into Santa Apollonia station, Peter felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Lisbon was larger and more cosmopolitan than Porto or Coimbra, a true European capital that had been shaped by centuries of maritime exploration, devastating earthquakes, and constant reinvention. It was also, according to the documents he had studied, the city where his family's network maintained its most important Portuguese offices and archives. The afternoon sun was brilliant as Peter emerged from the station and caught his first glimpse of the Tagus River, impossibly wide and dotted with ships that ranged from traditional ferries to modern cruise vessels. The famous red suspension bridge, the 25 de Abril Bridge, stretched across the water in the distance, looking remarkably similar to San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge and reminding Peter of how far he had traveled from his American life. Peter had booked a small hotel in the Alfama district, Lisbon's oldest neighborhood that had survived the great earthquake of 1755. The narrow medieval streets climbed steeply up the hillside below São Jorge Castle, creating a labyrinth of alleys, stairways, and hidden squares that felt more like a village than part of a major city. As he walked through Alfama toward his hotel, Peter was struck by how alive Lisbon felt compared to the cities he had visited in Spain. Laundry hung from balconies, neighbors called to each other from windows, and the sound of fado music drifted from open doorways. The famous yellow trams climbed impossibly steep streets with a cheerful clanging that seemed to define the city's rhythm. After checking into his hotel, Peter spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring Lisbon like a tourist rather than someone on a mission. He rode tram 28 through the historic neighborhoods, walked through the elegant Praça do Comércio with its grand archway opening onto the river, and climbed to multiple miradouros, the scenic viewpoints that offered spectacular vistas of the city's hills, red roofs, and sparkling water. At the Miradouro de Santa Luzia, Peter stood looking out over the Alfama rooftops toward the river and thought about how different this journey had become from what he had imagined when leaving Chicago. He had expected to find simple answers about his family's past, perhaps discover some interesting historical connections, and then return to figure out his life's next chapter. Instead, he had inherited responsibility for a 500-year-old international network, discovered that his quiet grandfather had been a major figure in humanitarian operations, and committed himself to reforming an organization that operated in the gray areas between legal and illegal activity. As evening approached, Peter made his way to the Bairro Alto, Lisbon's bohemian neighborhood known for its nightlife, fado houses, and traditional cafes. His grandfather's letter from Coimbra had contained a subtle reference that Peter had puzzled over. When you reach Lisbon, remember that the best Brazilian coffee is served where poets once gathered, and that some tables hold more than meets the eye. After asking several locals and consulting his phone's map, Peter identified the likely location his grandfather had referenced. A Brasileira do Chiado, one of Lisbon's most famous historic cafes, located on Rua Garrett in the elegant Chiado district. The cafe's exterior was distinctive, with Art Nouveau details and a bronze statue of the famous Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa sitting at one of the outdoor tables. Inside, the cafe retained its early 20th century character, with mirrors, marble tables, and an atmosphere that suggested countless literary and political conversations had unfolded within its walls. Peter ordered a Bica Portuguese espresso and found a seat at one of the marble tables near the back of the cafe, away from the tourist crowds gathered around Pessoa's statue outside. As he sipped his coffee and observed the mix of locals and visitors, he noticed an elderly man behind the counter watching him with interest. After a few minutes, the man approached Peter's table. "Excuse me, but you have the look of someone searching for something specific. Can I help you find it?" Peter decided to take a chance. I'm looking for a table that my family used to frequent. The family name was Mateus. The elderly man's face lit up with recognition. Ah, Mateus. Yes, of course. Your family has history with this cafe going back many decades. Please, come with me. The elderly man, who introduced himself as Senor Antonio, led Peter to a corner table near one of the large windows that looked out onto Rua Garrett. The table was similar to the others in the cafe: marble top, ornate metal base, but its location offered both privacy and a good view of the entrance. This was your family's table, Antonio explained. For as long as I can remember, and I have been working in this cafe for over 50 years, members of the Mateus family would come here when they visited Lisbon. Always this table. Always the same order: bica and a pastel de nata. Peter ran his hand over the smooth marble surface. Did my grandfather come here? Oh yes, many times. The last visit was perhaps 10 or 12 years ago. He sat at this table for hours, writing letters and meeting with various people. Very important people, I always thought, though he never made a show of it. Do you remember anything else about his visits? Antonio thought carefully before responding. I remember that he always examined this table very carefully when he arrived, as if checking that something was still in place. And I remember that he told me once that someday his grandson might come looking for the table, and that I should make sure that grandson sat in the right spot. The old man gestured to the specific chair where Peter was now sitting. This chair, facing the window and the entrance. He said it was important. After Antonio returned to his duties behind the counter, Peter began examining the table more carefully. The marble top was solid and heavy, but the metal base had several decorative elements that could potentially hide something. He ran his fingers along the underside of the table, feeling for anything unusual. First, he found nothing, but as he shifted position slightly, his fingers encountered what felt like a small metal box attached to the underside of the marble top with some kind of adhesive. Working carefully to avoid attracting attention from other cafe patrons, Peter managed to detach the box and bring it into his lap. The small metal container was about the size of a pack of cards, weathered but still intact. A small combination lock secured it, using the same 4-digit system that Peter had encountered at the monastery in Zaragoza. He tried 1487, the founding year of the network. The lock didn't open. He tried 1924, his grandfather's birth year. Nothing. Then he tried the date his grandfather had written the Coimbra letter according to the notation at the top. 2009. The lock clicked open. What do you think Peter's grandfather hid under this cafe table for over a decade? Could it be the final piece of guidance Peter needs before taking on leadership? Share your predictions in the comments. Inside the small metal box, Peter found a folded letter written on the same stationery his grandfather had used for the Coimbra message, along with a small key and what appeared to be a photograph. The photograph showed a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, standing in front of what looked like the entrance to a university or library. She had dark hair and an intelligent, serious expression. On the back of the photo, his grandfather had written, Mariana Costa, Portuguese Operations Coordinator, age 26, trustworthy, brilliant, essential to your success. She will reveal herself when the time is right. Peter stared at the photograph, his pulse quickening. Could this be the woman from the Madrid airport? The age would be about right if the photo had been taken 10 or 12 years ago, though it was hard to be certain from the single airport glimpse he had gotten. The letter was shorter than the Coimbra message, but no less significant. Peter, if you found this letter, then you've made it to Lisbon and you're close to accepting your inheritance. But there's one more thing you need to know before the council meeting. The Portuguese operations have been coordinated by a remarkable young woman named Mariana Costa for the past several years. She comes from a family that has worked with our network for generations, and she has proven herself to be both capable and committed to our humanitarian mission. When I recruited Mariana, I told her about you. I showed her photographs and described your personality, your talents, and your potential. I asked her to keep watch over your journey through Europe if and when you decided to explore your heritage. Mariana has been observing your progress from a distance, making sure that you were safe and that the various people you encountered were genuine rather than threats. The woman you saw briefly in Madrid was Mariana confirming your arrival and beginning her protective surveillance. She will reveal herself to you properly when you've fully committed to accepting the inheritance. But I wanted you to know that she has been there, helping to guide your path even when you didn't realize it. The key included with this letter opens a safety deposit box at Banco de Portugal, account number 1487 TM 2009. Inside that box, you'll find documents about the network's financial holdings and current operations. Study them before your council meeting. They will help you understand what you're truly accepting responsibility for. Trust Mariana, Peter. She understands the network better than anyone else of her generation, and she will be invaluable to you as you take on leadership. I believe she may become much more than just a professional colleague, if you allow it. Your grandfather, Thomas Matthews. Peter read the letter twice, his mind racing. The mysterious woman from Madrid had been watching over him the entire time, ensuring his safety while he stumbled through his discovery process. She worked for the network, came from a family with generations of involvement, and his grandfather had specifically recruited her years ago with Peter's eventual inheritance in mind. The realization that his entire Spanish journey had been more orchestrated than he had realized was both comforting and slightly unsettling. But his grandfather's final comment about Mariana potentially becoming much more than just a professional colleague suggested that the old man had seen possibilities that Peter himself hadn't yet considered. Peter was still processing the letter's revelations when he noticed a change in the café's atmosphere. Several regular patrons had turned their attention toward the entrance, and Señor Antonio behind the counter had straightened up with what looked like recognition and respect. A young woman had entered the café, and Peter's breath caught in his throat as he realized it was her. The woman from the Madrid airport, the one he had seen only briefly, but whose face had haunted his dreams throughout his Spanish journey. She was dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Without the dramatic red veil she had worn in Madrid, she looked younger and more approachable, though her intelligent eyes and confident bearing suggested someone accustomed to responsibility and authority. Mariana, it must be Mariana, scanned the café briefly before her gaze settled on Peter sitting at the Mateus family table. Her expression shifted from neutral observation to recognition, and a small smile played at the corners of her mouth as she saw the open letter and photograph on the table in front of him. For several long seconds, they simply looked at each other across the crowded café. Peter felt an inexplicable connection, as if they had known each other for years rather than sharing only a single brief glance in an airport weeks ago. Mariana's smile widened slightly, and she gave him a small, subtle nod, acknowledgement that he had found what he was looking for, and that he now understood her role in his journey. But instead of approaching his table, Mariana turned and walked back toward the café's entrance. Just before leaving, she glanced back at Peter one more time, her expression conveying something that could have been promise, amusement, or perhaps a challenge. Then she was gone, disappearing into the evening crowds on Rua Garrett. Peter sat frozen for a moment, torn between the instinct to chase after her and the understanding that this brief appearance had been deliberate, another piece of the careful orchestration that had characterized his entire Portuguese experience. But curiosity and a desire he didn't fully understand won out over caution. Peter quickly gathered the letter and photograph, left money on the table for his coffee, and hurried toward the entrance. Señor Antonio called after him. "She comes here often, that one. But she is like a ghost, here one moment, gone the next. Perhaps it is better to wait for her to decide the time is right. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible moment." Peter has finally seen Mariana again, and now he knows she's been watching over him all along. But why won't she talk to him yet? What's she waiting for? Peter emerged onto Rua Garrett just in time to see Mariana turning the corner onto Rua do Carmo, heading deeper into the Bairro Alto. He followed at a quick pace, trying not to run but not wanting to lose sight of her in the maze of narrow streets that characterized this neighborhood. Mariana moved with purpose through the evening crowds, clearly familiar with every turn and alley. She glanced back once or twice, confirming that Peter was following, but made no effort to slow down or make contact easier. The pursuit led Peter up steep staircases, through small squares where locals gathered at outdoor tables, and past Fado houses where the melancholy sound of Portuguese guitar drifted into the street. Lisbon at twilight was magical, but Peter was too focused on not losing Mariana to fully appreciate the atmosphere. Finally, she turned into a small square called Largo do Carmo, dominated by the haunting ruins of a Gothic church that had been destroyed in the 1755 earthquake and never rebuilt. The open-air ruins created an atmospheric space that was both beautiful and melancholy. Mariana stopped in front of the church ruins and turned to face Peter, who had just caught up to her, slightly out of breath from the chase through Lisbon's steep streets. For a moment, they stood looking at each other in the fading light, neither quite sure how to begin the conversation that had been delayed for weeks. Then Mariana spoke, her English accented but fluent. "You're faster than I expected, Peter Matthews. Most people would have given up 3 streets ago. Most people haven't been wondering about the mysterious woman from the Madrid airport for weeks," Peter replied. "Are you going to finally tell me who you are and why you've been appearing and disappearing throughout my journey?" Mariana's expression became more serious. "I'm Mariana Costa, and I work for the network your grandfather led. I've been watching over you since Madrid, making sure your discovery process proceeded safely. Why didn't you just introduce yourself from the beginning?" "Because your grandfather's instructions were very specific. You needed to discover your heritage gradually, to make your own decisions without outside pressure. If I had introduced myself too early, I would have influenced your choices in ways that he didn't want." Peter held up the photograph from the café table. "He knew you would be important to me." Mariana smiled softly. "Thomas was very perceptive about people and their potential connections. He thought we would work well together if you decided to accept your inheritance. And now, I've made my decision. I'm accepting the inheritance and taking leadership of the Portuguese operations. I know, João called me after your conversation in Coimbra, which means the time for distance and mystery is over. From now on, Peter, we work together." She reached into her bag and withdrew a business card, holding it out to him. "This is my official contact information. Tomorrow, I'll take you to the Banco de Portugal to access your grandfather's safety deposit box. Then we'll begin preparing you for the council meeting." Peter took the card, noting that it identified Mariana as Operations Coordinator, Portuguese Heritage Network, with a Lisbon office address and phone number. "That's it?" Peter asked. "After weeks of mysterious appearances, you're just going to hand me a business card and tell me we'll work together?" Mariana's smile returned. "What did you expect? A dramatic revelation scene with candlelight and music? Maybe something a little more personal than a business card." "Personal will come, Peter. But first, you need to understand what you've inherited and what responsibilities you're accepting. Your grandfather trained me to prioritize the network's interests over personal feelings, and that's a lesson you'll need to learn as well." Before Peter could respond, Mariana's phone buzzed. She checked the message and her expression became more businesslike. "I have to go, but I'll meet you tomorrow at 10 a.m. at your hotel in Alfama, where something professional. We'll be meeting with bank officers and reviewing sensitive documents." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Peter one more time. "For what it's worth, your grandfather was right. I think we will work very well together." Then she was gone again, disappearing into the evening crowds with the same practiced ease she had shown all along. Peter walked slowly back through the Bairro Alto toward his hotel in Alfama, his mind full of questions about Mariana and the upcoming transition to his new role. The brief conversation in Largo do Carmo had answered some questions but raised many others. When he returned to the café to retrieve any belongings, he might have forgotten in his rush to follow Mariana. Senor Antonio waved him over with a knowing smile. "She came back while you were chasing her," the old man said. "Left this for you." He handed Peter a small envelope with his name written on it in elegant handwriting. Inside was a brief note. "Peter, I know you have questions, and I promise to answer them all tomorrow. But tonight, just enjoy Lisboa. Walk through Alfama, listen to Fado, taste our wine. This city is part of your heritage now, and you should experience it without the weight of responsibility for one more night. The real work begins tomorrow. M." The note's informal tone was different from Mariana's businesslike manner during their conversation, suggesting that perhaps there was a more personal side to her that she kept carefully controlled while on network business. Peter decided to take her advice. He spent the evening wandering through Alfama's narrow streets, eventually finding a small fado house where he sat in the candlelit darkness, listening to a singer pour her soul into songs of longing and fate. The Portuguese word saudade, an untranslatable emotion combining nostalgia, longing, and melancholy, seemed to define not just the music but Peter's entire emotional state. He was simultaneously excited about the future and nostalgic for the simple life he had left behind in Chicago. He felt drawn to Mariana but wary of mixing professional relationships with personal feelings. He was confident about his ability to lead the network but uncertain about the moral complexities he would face. As the fado singer's voice filled the small space with emotion, Peter thought about his grandfather's words, "Be brave, be honest, and trust your instincts." The old man had guided him to this moment through carefully placed letters and orchestrated encounters. But from here on, Peter would have to find his own way. Back in his hotel room late that night, Peter spread out all the documents and letters he had collected throughout his journey. The Madrid airport envelope, the wooden box from Barcelona, the documents from Toledo and Granada, the monastery papers from Zaragoza, the vineyard records from La Rioja, his grandfather's letters from Coimbra and Lisbon. Together they told the story of a network that had operated for 5 centuries, protecting people and preserving knowledge. But they also told the story of Peter's own transformation. He had arrived in Madrid as a disillusioned former information broker trying to escape his past, and he was preparing to enter a council meeting as the inheritor of a legacy that stretched back to the age of exploration. Peter's phone buzzed with a text message from João. "Everything is prepared for the council meeting next week. The members are eager to meet you formally. Mariana will help you prepare. Trust her completely. She understands the Portuguese operations better than anyone except your grandfather did." Another message came through, this one from an unknown number but clearly from Mariana. "Sleep well, Peter. Tomorrow we begin your real education about what it means to lead the network. It won't be easy, but I think you're ready. See you at 10 a.m. Peter set his phone aside and walked to his window, looking out over the red roofs of Alfama toward the river. Somewhere out there, Klaus was planning how to respond to Peter's reformist agenda. Somewhere in the city, Mariana was preparing documents and briefings for tomorrow's sessions. And somewhere in the broader network, people were watching to see if the young American could successfully take on the responsibilities his grandfather had prepared him for. But for tonight, Peter allowed himself to simply be present in this moment, standing at a window in Lisbon, on the eve of accepting a 500-year-old legacy, with mysteries still unsolved and a future that promised to be anything but ordinary. His grandfather's voice seemed to whisper through the warm Lisbon night, "Be brave, be honest, and trust your instincts." Tomorrow, Peter would begin to apply those principles as the leader of the Portuguese operations. But tonight, he was simply Peter Matthews, a young man far from Chicago, about to begin the greatest adventure of his life. Thank you for staying with us through this magical evening in Lisbon. Peter has finally met Mariana properly and learned that she's been protecting him throughout his entire journey. The mysterious guardian from Madrid is real. She's beautiful, she's brilliant, and she'll be working closely with Peter as he takes on his new responsibilities. But Mariana made it clear that personal feelings must wait while professional duties take priority, a boundary that suggests she's as attracted to Peter as he is to her, even if she's better at controlling those feelings. The note she left at the café hinted at a warmer, more personal side beneath her professional exterior. Peter now has one night to process everything before beginning his intensive preparation for the council meeting. Tomorrow, Mariana will show him the full scope of what he's inherited, including financial records and operational details that will reveal the network's true scale and complexity. The romantic tension between Peter and Mariana is building beautifully, but both understand that earning the network's trust and proving Peter's leadership capabilities must come first. Will they be able to maintain professional boundaries while working so closely together? And what will happen when the pressures of leadership test their growing connection? Don't miss the next episodes as Peter's story continues with new challenges, deeper mysteries, and the developing romance that his grandfather predicted years ago. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of this incredible saga. The best is yet to come.